Hi everyone, it's Abby Amia here with Dr. John Bell from Wellshire Presbyterian Church in Denver, Colorado, and this is Tabletop Theology, a lighthearted conversation about serious topics. Today, we're talking about gay marriage, and I'm pumped about it. I'm excited because this has been probably one of the most dramatic shifts in my theology through my life, I would argue. So I'm really excited to talk about what our denomination, the PCUSA, has to say about it, what our church, Wellshire, says about it, and then what the Bible says about it. Are you ready, John?
Well, it's a tall order.
It's a tall order, but I think
this is a great topic. You know, when I was, as we approached this recording, I was thinking back, over my childhood and my young adult life and the prejudice and the hate and stereotypes of gay people. They were unquestioned, in my youth. So your point about how things have changed, it's really been a dramatic shift, and hopefully for the better. So I'm looking forward to this conversation as well. So you said where the church is. The PCUSA affirmed, gay ordination, which we did, and then a few years later, same-sex marriage. And some pastors started doing same-sex marriage, but it still was technically illegal in most states. And so in Colorado, it was technically illegal. So even though the denomination approved it, Wellshire, and in particular me, and I think most of our clergy staff waited for it to become legal. That's not true for all the clergy, but in 2015 there was a court case at the federal level that made the way clear for same-sex marriage all over the country. And so although Colorado's legislature never technically approved same-sex marriage, the Supreme Court ruling did make it legal for all of us. And so therefore, the denomination said every session, every presbytery can make their own decision. And at that point, Wellshire, I believe, unanimously affirmed Wellshire's session unanimously affirmed the fact that I and the church facilities could be used for same-sex marriage. And recently, I understand a couple of Supreme Court justices have indicated regret for that decision. So that's what makes it dramatic today. But currently, that's the way the law stands. And so we're open for business.
Yeah, and I think that's why we wanted to talk about it too, is to really express our love and affirming of our LGBTQ plus members of our congregation and our community that we're on your team here. And I think that there's just a real level of anxiety and fear going on with some of these conversations. So I want to say that off the bat, that we're on that team. We are here to support and love our LGBTQ plus neighbors. And in talking about this, I think, we are talking this from a straight cisgender perspective, and but I kind of want to talk to the members of that congregation, because I at least kind of grew up in the love the sinner, hate the sin mentality toward homosexuality. I have since changed perspectives, but can you talk to us a little bit about the Bible verses that are usually used to say that homosexuality is a sin, and how we might interpret those differently than we have in previous years?
Great question, Abby. So first I will say that and this is not something I'm articulate about, but in the general sense, we think of God as the creator. And so, to use Lady Gaga's phrase, born this way, when people are born this way, when we think of God as the creator, who are we to question, creation? So I think the biological piece is a big piece, and I'm not a medical doctor, and I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist, so I'll leave that one at that point. But we must think of God as the creator, and so the way people are born and the way they are created, we must accept and respect, because that's the way apparently God made us. So that's one piece to it. But the Bible, people just assume the Bible slams same-sex marriage or gay people, and you have to really drill down and be an intelligent biblical interpreter to realize what's going on. The Bible doesn't at all envision same-sex love in a committed relationship as we see now. There's nothing like that in Scripture. So if you go back to the Old Testament and you look at the passages, first of all, there's not that much in the Bible about gay people, not as much as people think. You've got the Sodom and Gomorrah text in Genesis, and then a terrible text in Judges. But those aren't about same-sex relationships. Those are about rape and pedophilia and violence, and have nothing to do with actually what we're talking about now. The people in Sodom and Gomorrah were terrible people, and they were violent, and they were cruel, and they were raping and pillaging, and they deserve to be judged for their behavior. But that's not loving, committed homosexual relationships, which we see today. Leviticus, of course, says some damning things, I think is the word. But, Leviticus has a lot of crazy stuff in it that 21st century Protestants, I had a hot dog last week.
Shame.
We had shrimp.
Mm-hmm.
Those things are forbidden in Leviticus, and so to pick and choose what you're going to obey in Leviticus and not obey is untrue. And of course, the Apostle Paul says, we're freed from the law, and what he's talking about is Leviticus, and the intense form of the law which we read in that. So any 21st century Protestant, American, modern Christian who thinks we should obey the Levitical law really is making a big mistake in terms of biblical interpretation and what we would consider Protestant Christianity. And that's a deep subject, but the Levitical law just doesn't apply to modern Protestants.
Praise God for that. I mean, really.
Right. So, then you've got some text, but then we jump to the New Testament, and you've got the main passages, Romans 1 and 2, and it does speak negatively about homosexuals, but then the list, it's sort of a gotcha text. It turns to insolent and haughty, and people who gossip, and people who don't like their parents or are not nice to their parents. And then Paul turns, if you turn to the second chapter, not the first chapter, he says, so, the point is, so all of you have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, which means none of us measure up. So even the worst reading of that is that we're all on the same page. We're all together as sinners. We're all lumped in the same group, and we need salvation from Jesus Christ. But it all revolves around biblical translation. Even the text in Romans, which speaks of homosexuality, probably probably is also pedophilia, not what we would recognize today as loving, committed relationships. So, that's a tough passage to interpret, but requires a lot of focus. But then the most important thing I think I can say this morning, and this will be tonight when we show it.
It'll be in the afternoon, yeah.
Is that, somewhat importantly, Jesus says nothing about homosexuality or same-sex marriage. It's not a topic that Jesus chooses to harp on, to dwell on, to say anything about. Now, just because it's not in the Bible doesn't mean he didn't have an opinion. The gospel writers, but when the gospel writers decided to put their gospels down, they didn't think whatever Jesus thought or said was important enough to make the gospels. So silence is not the most important thing, but because it doesn't mean it's right or wrong. It just means Jesus didn't choose to make a big deal out of it. Unlike divorce, I mean, he does talk about divorce, and the church has become rather cavalier in terms of divorce and remarriage and those things. Back in my childhood, that was a big deal, but the church has become accustomed to reinterpreting that, and so there's a parallel track there, I think, in terms of reinterpreting how marriage and those things actually happen. So the Bible is not
not as clear as people think it is.
It's not as clear as people. Thank you, Abby. I was searching for the right words, but if you look through the passages and actually, take them in their context, there's not that condemning word that people think it is. Leviticus does, yes, but again, you've got to take that as a Protestant, not as a first century Jew.
Well, I think it's so interesting because a lot of people I've seen who kind of push back on this of like, oh, the Bible doesn't say no, is, well, the Bible does clearly define what marriage is. So we're redefining marriage. But I know that this conversation is going to turn into one giant push for this book, which you gave to me to read. But the Bible's Yes to Same-Sex Marriage. It's fantastic. Recommend it to anyone. There's a few others. I think The Bible and the Gay Christian is another one. But this particular book talks a lot about how we're not redefining marriage, we're expanding the definition of marriage. That this is not rejecting what the Bible has talked about marriage. It's just now accepting and expanding the blessing of marriage to same-sex couples. And that, at least to me, it feels a little better, I suppose, as opposed to, ignoring like the biblical definition of marriage. Though I will point out that was written to really get a lot of babies to be born. I think it's an important thing to mention. But I do kind of want to ask about your opinion. I know you've read this book. He talks a bit about what made him start changing his mind was the fruit he was seeing in the lives of gay Christians who were either trying to obey what they believe the Bible was telling them, of suppressing this part of themselves, and then also the fruit of when they no longer suppressed it. Have you experienced that in your ministry? Has that something that's impacted you?
Well, to be fair, I didn't reread the book for this.
Sorry, putting you on the spot. I just read it.
I've read it 2 or 3 times now. I have done public talks about it, but so I'm not exactly sure what you're talking about. But yes, I have known gay or homosexual people since my college days, and faithful Christians, and have served the church well, and I've known to be oppressed for most of my life, and struggling and sad about that, but and quiet, for the most part, seminary colleagues, and they've got tremendous gifts for the church, tremendous gifts for ministry, a tremendous spirit within them. And it's just been a delight to see an opening up of the acceptance of them in terms of church work and ministry, and serving on the session, ordained as a minister, word and sacrament. It's really been a joy to see those gifts fully utilized in the church. So yes, that's been a great transition in my lifetime.
I think it's so special because the fruit aspect of it, of like where people were told they couldn't not only not have sex, because that's what usually people compare it to, of like, oh, it's just like celibacy before marriage. No, we're telling people they can't even love anyone and have intimate emotional relationships with them. But that the fruit of that is death and depression, and I mean the rates of suicide in gay teens, especially, and transgender people, that this is death, and that is not the message of the gospel. But then in these beautiful God-honoring marriages where people happen to be of the same sex, there is life, there is joy, there is service to the church. And I think that's such a beautiful reminder to us that as we're reading the Bible, you know, the Bible was used to justify some really horrible things in history, and we have to be careful of looking to that fruit of, is this what Jesus was? Is this showing the love that Jesus brought to this earth? And I think that's why a lot of major leaders, I'm thinking of Jen Hatmaker, who came out in support of gay marriage recently and has been very much rejected by the people of her past following. But I think that's what they're getting at, is that this is not a good thing. It's just not.
Well, you mentioned the passages about marriage in the Bible. And let's talk about that for a second, especially in Ephesians, you know, man, you know, and a woman, and they submit and blah, blah, blah. I mean, the Bible is such an interesting book, but you've got to read it in its context. And, you know, Paul makes it pretty clear what he's talking about there is the relationship between Jesus Christ, or God, and the church. And he's using marriage as an example of that relationship. And so the question becomes, is he describing what marriage is in the first century, or is he proscribing what it should be in the 21st century?
Oh, okay.
You know,
I like this.
I mean, is it a description of what marriage is, or a proscription or prescription? And you know, I think it's a description of what marriage was in the first century. And therefore, you know, it was accurate, but it's a reflection of what the relationship is between Christ and the church. And if you drill down into it, what it's talking about is unconditional love. Unconditional love. That marriage is about unconditional love. So, you know, I've known same-sex couples who are completely committed to unconditional love. I've known heterosexual couples who aren't committed to unconditional love.
Yeah.
I mean, just because it's a man and a woman doesn't mean it's an edifying relationship in the way that Christ envisions marriage. Or Paul. So, you know, what marriage is about, whether it's same-sex or heterosexual, marriage is about unconditional love. And, you know, we're all in this till death do us part. And, you know, to me, that's what the essence of marriage is. That's why, you know, I think this is such a positive transition in the 21st century to allow for same-sex marriage.
I agree. I think, I know I said at the beginning, but just affirming that these are God-given and blessed relationships. And I'm so grateful to be a part of a congregation that wholeheartedly supports that. I think we have some wonderful representations of same-sex marriage and heterosexual marriage in our congregation as examples to me in my own marriage. And I think that it's a really privileged place to have more examples of love. I don't see what the problem would be, be with that.
So one more thing before we finish. Importantly, marriage is actually mostly a civil right. I mean, it is the state, the nation, that grants the piece of paper that people sign, and it's a contract which goes to the courthouse. And that's an important part of marriage. I am able to do marriages because in the United States, or Colorado, the state allows me as a representative of the state to sign that piece of paper. I mean, that's literally what we're doing. And if you look at the marriage service, there are actually two sets of vows normally. The first set is the couple is looking at me, and I ask them a question, and they look at me and they say, "I do." And I ask the other, spouse the same question. They look at me in the eye and say, "I do." And then later in the service, they turn to each other and they say their wedding vows, or what we call their wedding vows. That they're making those promises to each other. So, there are two sets of vows. I was told in seminary the first set of vows used to be the secular that were done on the steps of the church, outside of the church. Then they come inside the church, and then the church blesses the marriage. But it's important to understand it's a civil right. Therefore, in the United States, it becomes a thing of equal rights, and because that's in our Constitution. And so, is marriage an equal right? And that's up to the voters. And in America, CNN had a poll this week, I believe, that said 70% of Americans are for same-sex marriage. That's an increasingly high number.
Yes.
Same-sex marriage is considered an equal right. And I thought that was affirming. Plus, as you might have seen, Pope Francis said last week that he is in favor, or the church is in favor, he speaks for the church, of civil marriage, same-sex civil marriage. And he's getting a lot of pushback, of course, from Catholic bishops and priests, but the Pope said he's for it. So civil marriage, by the state is becoming increasingly accepted. Even the Catholic Church is for it now. So that seems to be a right, which, is going to be hard to push back on. As for the church, we're for love. I mean, whatever, love is love. And so our job is to bless love wherever we see it, because God is love. And I think that's exactly what we're about now in the 21st century. And it's an exciting time. It's just a thrill.
That's a great place to end, I think. I think that we covered a lot of, I hope, and I want to encourage our audience, if this is something that you've either struggled with in your faith or even tried to ignore as part of that there are a lot of really great book resources. Put it back up. Yes, the Bible's Yes to Same-Sex Marriage, An Evangelical's Change of Heart. Bible and the Gay Christian is another one. But there's quite a few out there of these actual very biblical exploratory reviews of homosexuality in the Bible. And I think it's a great place to start for any Christian who is coming to this question.
This really makes me happy.
It makes me happy too. Next week, we will be right after November 3rd. So,
no.
So next week, we're going to be addressing whatever is happening.
Oh, no.
I know. For our audience, we usually record these on Wednesdays and share them on Thursdays. So we will.
Oh, no, we're doing Wednesday.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about whatever has happened on Tuesday.
Whatever's happened.
Yes.
Oh, no.
That's where we'll be. Or maybe we'll just be doing some prayers and meditation. I don't know.
I think, yeah.
We'll think of something.
Wow.
Yeah, it's time. We are going to get into some other, I know we've been doing some issues, theological issues, abortion, gay marriage, the election. But we are going to get back into some biblical things too. I know our highest listened to episode after abortion was the Trinity. So I think that we are going to bring back some other of those types of things and talk about some of them. But we wanted to kind of head on to these hot topics that are in the news and on everyone's hearts. But thank you all for listening. We'll be back next week. And prayers for everyone.
Yeah.
In the coming
Have a
days.
great week.
Have a great week.